With the highest number of coronavirus deaths outside China, Iran is now facing one of its biggest challenges. Is the US government ready to cooperate with Iran on a health issue that could become a global pandemic? I sat down here at the State Department with the US Special Representative for Iran, Brian Hook, one-on-one. Brian Hook, you are the US Special Representative for Iran. You've spearheaded the so-called maximum pressure campaign, which has included tough sanctions against the Iranian government. Now, in addition to the many challenges that Iran faces, it is trying to contain the spread of the coronavirus. To what extent is the US government ready to cooperate with Iran's health authorities on this?
Well, any time that there's been some sort of medical or natural crisis in Iran, the United States has always stepped forward to offer assistance to the Iranian people. We are right now actively working on what we would be able to do to help. Part of the problem is that the regime has been suppressing vital information about the coronavirus. And we saw now that the Deputy Health Minister himself has it. There's been 19 deaths. In light of this regime's history of not being honest with its own people, we should expect that number to be far higher, both the number of people that have been infected by it and the number of people that have died.
So you say you're looking into what you could possibly offer in terms of assistance. So my question is, are you ready to assist, to cooperate with the Iranian authorities on this global health issue, which many parts of the world face as well? The World Health Organization is saying it could become a pandemic.
Well, we have not been asked by the regime to cooperate or to provide any assistance, but typically when there is a crisis affecting the Iranian people, we look for ways to help. And so we're actively, don't have an announcement for you right now, but we're actively working on ways that we can help the people.
Could one of these ways include the easing, if not the lifting of sanctions, which it has been well documented has had a huge impact on Iran's ability to trade with all nations and to secure some of this much needed medical supply?
Well, we recently moved a very big shipment of medical drugs to the Iranian people through this Swiss humanitarian channel. And I expect in the next week or so we'll have another announcement on moving medical supplies to the Iranian people. The oil and the banking sanctions are completely unrelated to the health crisis facing Iran. The reason why we've targeted oil and banking is because that's how the regime generates revenue, which it uses to fund its malign activities and to prioritize its proxies over its own people. That's been the biggest problem. The biggest obstacle.
You say that though, but these US financial sanctions also include all trade with Iran. That obviously does include as well transactions that have to do with medical supplies. I mean, here you have Human Rights Watch reporting, saying that companies and banks are hesitant to trade with Iran, that they are wary of running afoul of the United States if they did so.
Right. It is true that banks are concerned about that, but you have to understand the reason of their concern. Iran's financial sector is opaque. It is notorious for money laundering and terror finance. And so banks, their first obligation is to know their customer. And even though our sanctions regime makes exceptions for food and medicine and medical devices, a lot of banks are very concerned about permitting transactions where that money ends up on the battlefields in Syria or in Yemen or supporting Lebanese Hezbollah or Hamas.
Yeah, but let's look at this issue though. You say that you haven't been asked yet by the Iranians to help, but would you offer to help them, if not from a purely humanitarian perspective, from perhaps a selfish national security interest? I mean, you have thousands of troops across the border from Iran in Afghanistan. So from that perspective alone, I mean, this virus, as you know, could spread like wildfire if it isn't contained.
Right, and that is the first responsibility of the Iranian Health Ministry, to contain this. It looks like, I saw what President Rouhani said, he wants sort of business as usual to continue.
But does this mean, though, that you're not willing to offer your help?
No, if you look at the history, the United States on a very regular basis offers humanitarian assistance, and our sanctions make exceptions for humanitarian assistance. That's going to continue. We are obviously prioritizing the health of the American people, and President Trump is focused on that. At the same time, we are looking for ways that we can help the Iranian people deal with the spread of the coronavirus.
Do you accept, at the very least, that US sanctions are making the situation far worse for ordinary Iranians to deal with this challenge?
It hasn't had any effect on it at all. There's no connection between oil exports and the coronavirus.
But Human Rights Watch says that, of course, the U.S. sanctions are a significant factor in limiting Iran's access to funds for imports of medicines and medical equipment. Can you deny that it has an impact?
Yeah, I can deny it because the regime knows that we're not the problem. The biggest obstacle is the regime itself, and the Iranian people know this. I have talked publicly about a memo that was leaked from the chief of staff to President Rouhani, who asked, why is 1 billion euros in medical supplies gone missing? And there are many instances of the Iranian regime either diverting medical supplies for the regime elite or selling it on the black market so it can fund its own operations. The Iranian people know that the regime does not prioritize the welfare of the Iranian people.
But obviously they are facing a very significant challenge.
Right.
Are you not willing at this stage, at least, for a limited period, to put aside your own vested political interests and look at this from a humanitarian perspective, offer some kind of help and assistance on a global issue of significant consequence?
There isn't any connection between the sanctions we put in place against the regime and the health crisis they're facing, and the Iranian people know that. No, you haven't quoted any Iranian...
But you say that. Look at Iran's GDP. I mean,
but I would challenge you to quote one Iranian who has said that there's a connection between our sanctions. So look at the November protests.
But this is the spokesman for Iran's health ministry.
Yeah, that's a government official.
Kianush Hajanpour. You're saying
an Iranian
official.
Well, of course they lie.
So let me quote to you an outside source.
Statements.
No, Mr. Hook, let me quote to you an outside source. Dr. Osman Dar of the Chatham House Global Health Program. He says that because of sanctions, Iran is, quote, less able to access quality-assured medical equipment and countermeasures necessary for combating the outbreak.
But he doesn't
this is
say
an outside
why.
source.
Right, but he's not explaining
He says
why.
Because of the sanctions.
No, it's because he doesn't understand cause and effect. So the Iranian regime, because its financial sector, you haven't asked about FATF countermeasures that were put in place against Iran because of money laundering and terror finance. Banks don't want to do business with the regime because their banks are corrupt. That's why medicine doesn't make its way to as much as it could. So when all of these banks are corrupt and dirty banks, no surprise that these banks are having a hard time processing any transactions.
So just to conclude, Mr. Hook,
Yeah.
is it fair to say that there will be no cooperation anytime soon between the US government and the Iranian authorities on this?
We're looking for ways that we can help the Iranian people since the regime is failing to protect its own people. So we're actively looking for ways to do that, and if we can, we will.
Can you give us an idea of what that might be?
Well, we're working as quickly as we can. But the regime is the first line of defense, and they're failing. Okay?
Mr. Brian Hook, thank you so much.
Thanks. You bet.